Done. We might
We
ask
are
everybody to
recording.
go ahead and mute. We had a lot of people unmuted at the beginning, just chatting.
Thank you. Yes, please, everyone, mute yourselves. Thank you so much. We are just so happy to see everyone today. And let me see if I can share my screen and get everything going. Give me one moment. I apologize. I am just about ready here. Oh, goodness. Here we are. So welcome to our session, Scaffolding with Lesson Targets in a Virtual World. Hoping everybody can see my screen. Meg, can you see my screen?
I can.
Fantastic. So we just have these three outcomes. We want to understand lesson targets. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into Alabama Insight just to remind you of that tool and how useful it is to unpack critical standards and create those targets. And then we've got several scaffolding examples that we're going to review with you. So as you know, our focus is PLC, so I want to circle back to that initial connection. These are some of the big ideas that we've talked about. Schools are institutions of learning. We accept learning as a fundamental purpose of our school. Second of all, we are committed to working together to achieve our purpose. And our team is a group of people working interdependently. That's our theme this year, hashtag we are all better together. Not just working in silos independently, but interdependently, knowing that when we work together as a group, the product will be better. The four questions that we've just hammered home time after time. What do you want students to know? How will you know the student knows it? What do you do if the student doesn't know it? What do you do if the student does? So we're going to focus in on those critical standards. That's what we want students to know. That's going to be the focus of today's session. So we know that the coronavirus just changed everything and forced us to quickly pivot to remote instruction. So we've made a conscious, intentional effort to try to link everything we're doing with scaffolding to remote instruction, knowing that there are school districts that are going to full virtual instruction pretty soon, and we're going to be able to be fluid back and forth. So we wanted to be sure that this information was really applicable to you right now. These are some remote instruction best practices. It's so important that you set expectations and that you're clear for instruction. How do you want students to check in? How do you want them, do you want their cameras on the whole time, or when can they not? How should they participate? Are they raising their hands? Is it Zoom or Google Meet? So it's just so important that students are clear. And in a remote setting, there's going to be a combination of synchronous, where students are with teachers in undergoing instruction in real time, and asynchronous learning, where students will be pursuing tasks on an individual basis. And it's so important that the learning, that the instruction is engaging. With office hours, be sure that those are established during the workday. Students need to know how to reach you, especially if it's an asynchronous learning opportunity. If there are questions, they need to know how to contact their teacher. We've talked so much about the social emotional learning aspect and those needs that students have. They're not able to collaborate, they're not able to gather, and they just miss seeing their friends, and we as adults miss seeing each other, so that's really times 10 for students. So addressing those social emotional needs can come through allowing for student reflection and collaboration, having them, giving them opportunities to work together, and limiting their screen time. If this was a pre-COVID situation, we would never expect our students to sit in one place for hours and hours on end. So there's got to be some flexibility within that screen time, and it's really not a best practice for students to sit in front of a screen for long periods of time. Wanted to refer you all to this time frame for remote instruction. This is pre-K through 12. It came directly from the ALSDE roadmap that you can find on the State Department webpage. I've highlighted the secondary grades because our SIG schools are secondary schools, but these are recommended times per day for remote instruction. And this column here, I've had folks question, well, what exactly does this mean? If you've got an older student that's in grades 6 through 12, sustaining their attention, that time frame should be within the time frame of a lesson. So if students are going to be on, say, from 8:30 to 11:30, however long a class period is during that time, if a class period is perhaps 30 minutes or 45 minutes, that's the recommended length of time that you can expect a secondary student to remain engaged in instruction. You've seen this before where we've got students, even during the pandemic, that have maybe a great support system at home. They have a device, they have just everything they need to be successful in a remote setting. And so they're going to achieve no matter what. You've got some students that are getting some support and getting kind of just what they need to get by. And you've got students that maybe don't have a Wi-Fi connection. Maybe they don't have a device and they're working with packets. Maybe they're home by themselves during the day and not getting that support that they need to keep them motivated and engaged. And they're starting off behind the 8 ball with remote instruction. So equality, giving everybody the same thing, is not necessarily going to address everybody's needs. Equity is where we give everybody exactly what they need to be successful. And ideally, we want to get to the point where the barrier of the fence is removed entirely. So how do we get students from where they are to where they need to be? We're going to talk more about lesson targets. So what exactly is a lesson target? First of all, if we look at our critical standard, a lesson target is just a part of that standard that specifically describes information, skill, and reasoning that you want the student to master. It's achieved in a series of lessons. Typically, it's going to take more than one lesson to even master a lesson target, much less the entire standard. And it's written in student-friendly language. Students should be able to know what's expected of them at any given time. So it should be written in language that they totally understand. So which standards? We're just going to hammer this home. Critical standards. Y'all, you just saw that picture of the coronavirus. We are in a pandemic. We are in an uncertain situation. It will feel really impossible to do every single standard that's listed for your content area. So the State Department has very purposefully and intentionally selected those standards that are necessary for success in courses after the one that the teachers are currently teaching. And they're identified for all courses K through 12. These are the standards we are to use. Personally, I've got a project that I'm working on. I have got the entire math course of study, the current one for 2016. I'll work on the 2019 one later. And I've just highlighted all of the critical standards, and I'm going to go back and crosswalk those through our ACT expectations so that we can just see direct alignment. The critical standards are what we need to use. Moreover, expect students to handle grade level instruction, even after months of uncertain learning experiences. Please join with me in viewing our students as coming to us with strengths. When you look at this glass, if you think of our students as a glass, they are half full. Don't think of them as in a deficit situation. We really don't know what's going on at home. We don't know what's going on the other side of the screen. See students as though they are bringing strengths to the table. Start with grade level instruction, and then the scaffold is what they need to be able to access or engage with that grade level instruction. Start at grade level. So I know that folks have been joining us, and again, I welcome those I haven't been able to welcome thus far, and I'm just glad that you're able to join us. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Meg at this time, but please grab a square. This is our attendance sheet. So if you will, please go to this link, click on that, or you may have your device, you may have a phone or an iPad, use this QR code. We just want to be sure that every single school is represented. So if you would, please take a few minutes as we're transitioning, and let's take attendance.
Dr. Anderson, if you would drop the link into the chat. I've already started sharing, so I can't do it.
All righty, will do.
There should be 3 pages, so if one fills up, just move on down to another one. So again, the QR code, the link is here, and it will be open for a little bit. So if the PDF, you can go back in and join. Did you get that in the chat?
Coming down.
Okay. Thank you.
There it is. Hope everybody's able to see that in the chat.
All right. I think most people have had a chance. Dr. Anderson, if you can drop it in a few minutes again, just to make
I
sure.
sure will.
Everybody that opportunity, and we'll keep moving so we get out on time. What we're going to talk about in the next few minutes is the Insight tool. I've showed it to several people, and then we've got new folks, but it's something you're really going to want to be able to bookmark, want to be able to use, because it's going to make all the difference as we move forward, especially in the scaffolding presentation. So this is what it looks like. Here's the address when you get the PDF, or we send all this to you, it will already be hyperlinked there as well. So what we did, and how it's so crucial, because we go to different schools with different age levels and different, obviously, areas of teaching, and we're like, well, what is it that the 6th graders are doing? And we were looking at some other material, and it says 6th grade's a major year of transition, which is why we made it a point to pick out a 6th grade standard. This is the entire standard in Reading for Literature 6.1, or as Alabama numbers, as you know, they do it in an ordinal fashion. This is number 1. It happens on here. This is also hyperlinked, take you right to the critical standards, to be found on page 19. So we were sure to pick a critical standard. We were sure to pick a transitional standard, and we're going to take it from here and break it into a target. We added this slide for a particular purpose, which was, I know it's hard to see, and I know when you get the presentation, hopefully you can look at it more closely, but here is the 6th grade standard that says cite textual evidence to support analysis. Well, we almost use the 9th grade standard, which says the same thing, except it adds in analysis of primary and secondary sources. So when you look at this, you can see that it starts in kindergarten, but there's a very natural progression all the way up to, I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong one on 9 and 10. The actual one for grade 9 is cite strong and thorough textual evidence, where here it just says cite textual evidence. I got ahead of myself because it's always exciting to me when we look at this whole page here, that it also has the the literature portions for history and social studies listed, and science and technical. So the same standard in history, which is reading history 9 and 10, if you're looking here at 9th grade, is still site specific textual evidence to support analysis of primary and secondary documents. So you see that you're citing them here, you're being more thorough and using strong evidence here, and here you're doing all the same things, but you're just doing it because you're in history with primary and secondary sources. In the science and technical area, you are using technical text. So a lot of times we have our teachers in high school say, I don't teach reading. No, that's not, we're not asking you to teach reading. We're asking you to use reading to teach your content. And there is a standard for that. And it is all right here. But this is a very natural progression that really just goes with the Bloom's verbiage as you move up towards the higher grades. So now we're going to take this standard again, same standard we started with. And I have a little Insight icon here because everywhere that you can find this information in Insight, I want you to know that that's there and save yourselves a whole lot of time. I do not reinvent the wheel. If it's already done, I'm going to let somebody do it for me. So here it is. And we've taken, as it looks on the screen, different ways to say, hey, I got to break this out. So one part is textual evidence. Another part is to support analysis of what the text says explicitly. So now we're going to have to think, what do we got going on here? Because this has at least 3 parts to it. And we cannot teach standards in just isolation. Some of this is going to be going as we teach all the time. Inferences drawn from the text, that's just not a one-day teaching thing. It's in the standard, but you're going to see it several times, meaning here's my ELA. I just showed you that a history teacher may see it. You may see it again in a science standard. These are parts, though, of the whole of the ELA standard. So, oh gosh, now we got some words in there. Well, I wonder what that meant. Do my kids really know that cite means this, that textual evidence is support or proof? What do we mean by support analysis? Do we know in kid-friendly, this still isn't even in kid-friendly language. This is just saying these are what these things mean. And a big aha right here is the identify vocabulary. In the Insight tool, it's not called the vocabulary column, it's teacher vocabulary. Because if the teacher is using the correct vocabulary, the students are going to know the vocabulary. And oftentimes in a testing situation, it's not the answer the kid doesn't know, it's the question. They're not familiar with the words that are listed here. So how do they know what it is that you're talking about? So this goes in face-to-face or remote. So always look at the academic vocabulary, but particularly the teacher's responsibility to be using teacher vocabulary. So let's break this into a part, and I'm going to ask, we're going to look at this first one where we talk about cite. Again, we are still working. We haven't left the standard. We're still looking at standard 6.1. So now we said, oh, cite textual evidence. What could that mean? Well, that means from a kid's standard, from a lesson target, I can find proof from my text to back up my opinion. Make sense to you guys? This is the same 3 parts that we were looking at a moment ago. So how about number 2? Drop in the chat how you think you could effectively change support analysis of what the text says explicitly into more kid-friendly language. And a lot of times when we do this in person, we actually have it drawn and circled on a piece of paper for a gallery walk, because we have different standards for each content area. So we can go and look. Dr. Anderson, you want to look at some of those chats and tell me what's in the chat?
There's nothing in the chat as of yet.
Come on, folks. I got to have some help with number 2. What do you mean support analysis of explicit? What's another word for explicit? You can unmute and talk if you don't feel like chatting.
Yes, feel free to unmute if you would like to have
specific.
There we go. Specific. Thank you, Ms. Settle. Also from the chat, it says, what does the text say exactly? Thank you, Karen. And Ms. Brower is saying fully in detail.
All right, let's look at the third one. Support analysis of inferences drawn from the text. And I will tell you, from all the years of doing Scantron, inferences was one of the lowest standards all the way through. And I think it came from the very word itself. What kids thought that word meant.
In the chat, Meg, I see Treba Young has said provide details.
Okay. Explain.
Thank you. Explaining. And Meg, you always use a great example about inference.
Yeah, my go-to on this is, because I run into kids all the time. It seems a little young, but if a child or anybody sees a red truck with a ladder and a light going around, hurrying down the street, making a noise, what kind of truck do we think that is? Fire truck. Do anybody have to tell you it's a fire truck, or do you know that a truck with a ladder might be going to a place that's having a fire? What do you already know, and what is the situation telling you? You're inferring, but nobody says every time, hey, that's a red truck with a ladder going to a place I bet's on fire. It is what you already know. And when you put it to kids like that, they're like, oh, well, I knew that. Yeah, that's what makes it an inference. Exactly.
Also in the chat from Shonda Tolliver, she mentioned drawing conclusions.
Yes, based on what you already know. That's a good one. So here's just, and I'm not going to spend very much time because you guys can see what's happening. We're taking this lesson target and we're making it. Oh, I got to get rid of my annotation. Sorry about that. We're looking at turning the targets into I can statements. So when you change that into it, what are some words that could be problematic? We've done them in a couple of different ways. We have some circled, some underlined, some that are got boxes around them. So we are looking at words that may cause issues with the students and how we can turn that into changing these to I can statements. Kid-friendly language. So now we got something for you to do. If you'll go to the top of your screen, and you should have something that says annotate. And if you click on annotate, below there are stamps, there's text. So if you want to pull either one of those and tell me here, what are some things that you might want to go more in depth with your students? What would you want to rewrite, re-identify, say more clearly to your students? Oh, got a star. Identify. Yeah, I think, thank you for those with textual. I think sometimes it's just, they don't realize that that can be a magazine. They often think because they hear textbook, it's got to be a text. It doesn't. It's anything that might be written. Awesome. Look at y'all just being so engaged by using your tools. I'm so proud. A proud moment. Anybody got anything they want to add to these? Yeah, I think key points. Awesome. Good job. Thanks, everybody. If you don't have anything to say, I'm going to clear and move on. Isn't it fun to be like a kid and draw on the screen, though? Couldn't you kind of stay here for a minute and just play with it? I know I would. I like to try the different stamps. Okay. Oops, I got to close out so I can get my little pointer back. All right, I'm not going to take the time, although everything is hyperlinked, and I really, really encourage you to go into the Alabama Insight tool. I simply went into the Insight tool, knew what standard I was working with because we were prepared for this, and here's what all the columns look like. Generally, they go across the page and you have to scroll at the bottom. I took screenshots so that you could see what the entire page for this standard looks like. Look, here are the skills. Students are able to do these things. This is where the skills and knowledge, and we have knowledge circled here. This is what they should come to you knowing. And the big thing that we want to make, the point we want to make here is we've got to work with grade level content. We're going to talk about how to reach back and bring them forward, but we don't necessarily, or you're not going to start, even if they're on a third grade level. You could pull the standard up in third grade, pull the standard up in sixth grade, and look at how they match and what you can move them. But we've got to work in grade level content, or we're never going to move them if we're just working on the grade level that they're on. So here's the knowledge that the student should have. I know the word should. I'm going to get there. Here's the teacher vocabulary column. If you notice, this is exactly what we were doing a few slides back. The students need to understand this. But here's the thing. If you want to know that they are able to do this on grade level, here is your evidence of student attainment. This is what they should be able to do if they're on level with this standard. All right. So they're not there. What are you going to do? I think this is oftentimes, especially the further up in grades you go, meaning kind of in elementary, I think we dance around this a lot more than maybe secondary people do. How did they get there? What might they have missed? Think of these as steps under the curriculum guide. The curriculum guides were originally put out by the special education department, but they really need to stop being considered as just a special ed document. These are scaffolding. These are steps to get your student to where they need to know. This comes in the prior knowledge part. The first thing, they've got to read a text and understand it and answer questions. Well, then maybe they've got to answer details and tell you what that example is. Then as we move up to 6.1.2, they got a quote from a text when they explain it. So you've gone from reading it to them, they answer a question, till they can refer to it in text. Now they literally have to go find it, quote it, and be accurate about what the text says. And notice that word explicit starts in that second step. So you're never leaving the academic vocabulary, even though they may be below grade level. So then they've got to define inference and textual evidence. If we're able to do these things, we should be up here in the knowledge and the skills. They're able to do these things, and this is what they need to know. So everybody understand how this page would look for every standard? Any questions? Again, Alabama Insight is linked all over the place. Given time, if you want to stay on and look at it more, I'll be glad to show you, but we did want to get just bogged down in this. Every subject should have, or is in process of having a curriculum guide. They're not always in, let me go back one. Quite often you will find the curriculum guides right in the Insight tool. If this column has not been developed in your particular discipline, if you will go to the link provided here, you will find these curriculum guides in your other subjects. For instance, we went into 12th grade and did a search for economics, and were able to find these tools that would work, that would bridge, I hate to say bridge, but these are steps that lead towards the overarching standard for economics. See how these works? I was reading factors. So we're working our way up to the actual standard itself. And in the Insight tool, it would still show you academic vocabulary. It would still show you the evidence of attainment. All of those parts would be in for that standard as well. Now we're going to move on, and this is where we're going to shift again and let Dr. Anderson start with scaffolding. I'm going to unshare. And it's you.
All righty. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. So now we're going to shift into a direct conversation about scaffolding. Scaffolding specifically is a teaching method that enables a student to achieve a task. If you think of a building, you've driven by a building that's had this big scaffold on the side. You know that's a temporary structure. It's not going to be there once they actually finish building the building, but it's needed for a certain amount of time. So I love this definition because it's a temporary structure that is gradually shedded. So there's assistance that's needed just to keep this building up. But once they get the foundation laid, once they get the walls up and the roof, you don't need that anymore. But it's needed initially. So think of learning to ride a bike. So here's a good scaffolding example. When I taught my daughter to ride a bike, I sat her on the bike to demonstrate how to ride, started her out with training wheels. Then I gradually raised the training wheels. Once she was ready to remove them, I steadied her with my hand, walked beside her, and only then did I let her take off on her own. That's a good example of scaffolding. What do you think this example would look like if there was no scaffolding? Just putting them on the bike and giving them a shove. So we just really thought this would be a great example to illustrate the need for support. Meg was telling me that in England, the word for training wheels, they use stabilizers. And sometimes we just need a little bit of stability. We've created a folder full of scaffolding resources, and there's a great article that's from ASCD. It's called Just in Time. I really would ask you to read that article. It's got some great examples in it. So if you're talking about scaffolding, you want your faculty, or if you want to give someone a better idea of what it is, that article is a great example. I want to turn things over to Tora. She's got the next couple of slides.
All right, so what does this look like in your classroom? How do you get started? When you're planning your lessons, what are some things that you need to keep in mind? Most of the time when teachers are doing a lesson in the classroom, they have their lesson plan in front of them, and they have a direct objective that they want to accomplish. And Meg has shown you how, and Karen has told you how to make those objectives specific to a specific target. Well, in your conversation, I know that there are a lot of strategies that you use. Well, these are some specifics and why you use those strategies. Verbal scaffolding is necessary. Sometimes you want them to paraphrase. A lot of times you have them to think aloud, and that's very necessary in this virtual platform, because you really need to gauge what the students are actually thinking. And sometimes you need to model that for them. Let them see you think aloud so they'll know what they're supposed to be thinking. When you get to procedural scaffolding, when you're looking at procedures in your classroom, sometimes they need those specific routines. They need to have jot notes and complete a jigsaw. Do a think, pair, share. When they're doing a think, pair, share, the teacher should be listening specifically for what the students are sharing. That is going to guide them to their next steps. A lot of times we have to be willing to shift when you're in a lesson. When students are sharing and they are, you can gauge specifically where they are. When you are, when Meg showed you that anchor chart, it specifically gives you an idea of exactly where the students are. So that way you should know what your next steps are. So let's just say I'm listening to my students. I walked around, I'm monitoring what they're doing. And I noticed that a lot of them, when they're sharing their responses are at a third grade level. So with this standard on the anchor chart, it's they're working on central idea and theme of a passage. And when they're giving their theme, most of them are just simply recounting the details in the story. So I know that they're pretty much performing when it comes to this particular standard on a third grade level. And a lot of our students are going to come to us behind grade level. But if I'm a sixth grade teacher and they're at a third grade level, I can't keep them there. The goal is to teach them the standard on the grade level they are. So I had to look at what the sixth grade standard requires them to do. And as Meg said, it's simply just a little change as you move up in vocabulary to the specifics of what they're required to do. So instead of them recounting the details of the story, the theme is for them to determine in the sixth grade to determine the theme and how it is conveyed through a particular details. So I've got to get them to the point where they're just not recounting, but I've got to move them up. And as you see, as it goes up to fourth grade, that they're going to summarize the details. So I'm going to get them to recount, give me a summary of it. And I'm going to use my procedural vocabulary, my questioning, those strategies to get them to that point. So I'm going to keep moving them up until we gradually reach exactly where I need them to be. So, they're recounting. I'm going to use specific questioning, modeling to get them to summarize. And then in fifth grade, we're going to talk about the character specific details from the story that the characters are doing that are going to help me determine what supports that central idea so that we can meet the sixth grade standards. It's not enough just to meet them where they are, but we've got to move them to where they're supposed to be.
Amen. And just along those same lines, this is another tool that you'll find in the scaffolding folder that's in the SIG resources. This is a document that we have found particularly helpful as you're thinking about the different vocabulary that's in each standard, each critical standard. The standard may have the word analyze in it, as we've talked about before. And we may have to come down here to start them at a lower level, as Taurus was just saying. So we'll start with remembering and understanding. We'll move up to application until we can get to the analysis. There are different action words here that really help us to increase the level of the rigor. And another wonderful feature of this particular document, since we're working on a remote basis, there are a variety of technological tools that we can employ to further support the DOK level that we're on. If it's just a basic level, students may just be doing a Google search just to find information at a very basic level, all the way up until they perhaps use one of these tools here. I'm not familiar with all of these. Edmodo, and then as we're actually creating information, there's Nearpod and Prezi. There's just a variety of different tools. So just wanted to offer this as another example of tools that will support the scaffolding process. And in the process of our research of scaffolding, we've already talked about several kinds of these scaffolds, and just want to give you some additional concrete examples of scaffolds: a ladder, a bridge, and a harness. So an example of a ladder are examples that you've already heard from Meg and Taurus, where students are really operating below grade level. And as Taurus said, instead of meeting them where they are, we're going to start with grade level content. So your first task is to choose your critical standard. These icons here are to remind us that the Alabama Insight tool gives us the information that we need for this process. Create your lesson target. As Meg was showing us before, you're going to break that standard down, identify your vocabulary, and then be sure that the target is written in kid-friendly language. The end of lesson grade level expectation in Alabama Insight, that's called evidence of student attainment. It's right there for you. Just check that out. And then go to that curriculum guide, as Meg was showing you how to start at the lower rung, the lower concepts, those lower standards, and then just work your way up. And I cannot emphasize what Meg said enough. The curriculum guide was originally generated for special education students, but it is a general education tool. Everyone should be using it. It's great for all students. And so that's really going to help us climb the ladder and get to where we need to go. And here's an example. This is an 11th grade ELA standard to determine an author's point of view or purpose in a text in which the rhetoric is particularly effective, analyzing how style and content contribute to the power, persuasiveness, or beauty of the text. Woo, that's a mouthful. So there are lots of different ways you can pull this standard apart. And in this particular example, and this is a critical standard, we've gone all the way down to 5th grade for this 11th grade standard. And you can talk about the narrator's point of view, move that to how the author will compare and contrast points of view of the characters. And from there, you can move on to an 11th grade level, and that just takes you up the ladder. And just wanted to share this particular feature. You know, with Alabama Insight, there are actual lessons that go along with many of the standards. And this is an example of a lesson that we thought would be particularly interesting. Again, you're accessing grade level content, even if students may not understand the word rhetorical in that particular standard. This particular lesson just asks you to find an editorial cartoon. I thought this one would be interesting since we're in the midst of distance learning. And students are to create a brief video. So with Flipgrid, they post a 90-second video response to this particular cartoon. So even if they're not really sure of all the vocabulary, we can still access this grade level content in ways that students can feel success.
And
So,
it also allows for differentiated instruction because each of the students may respond differently due to their learning needs, but that allows them all to be part of the same lesson.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another kind of scaffold is a bridge. So there may be procedural really strengths that a student has, that they're really able to do computations, but perhaps they might not be able to apply that content to a word problem. So we're going to give a math example here. So again, you choose your critical standard, create your lesson target, look at that evidence of student attainment, and then create a task that's of similar complexity. So here's an example. Here's a 6th grade math standard, solve real world and mathematical problems involving the 4 operations with rational numbers. So the lesson target is just to solve math problems using division, not all 4. So we're just going to do division of fractions and whole numbers because those are examples of rational numbers. So here's an example of a problem. So perhaps a student already knows how to divide 1 by 2 and to divide 2/3 by 2. So they can take that procedure and apply that same information to this particular problem. So they're going to divide 1 by 4 and divide 1/2 by 4, put that together to see how much butter is actually in each dish. The next kind of scaffold is just learning styles. So that's something we're typically used to dealing with, whether it's a visual or auditory or kinesthetic learning style. Leverage that learning style to make lessons increasingly engaging. Again, that's another best practice for remote learning, is that we should have engaging synchronous and asynchronous lessons. So go back to Alabama Insight, choose that critical standard, create your lesson target, look at that evidence of student attainment, the end of lesson grade level expectations, and look at how you can facilitate learning by incorporating an activity that flows right into a student's learning style. So you might need manipulatives for those who need that hands-on learning. There might be an appropriate video for visual or auditory learners. And in our research for this presentation, we found that virtual manipulatives increase the understanding for students with disabilities who were in middle school. So again, good instruction is good instruction. We've got examples of virtual manipulatives. Again, Meg has made this presentation into a PDF and we'll send it out to everyone. In our Office of School Improvement Drive, there is a folder that's entitled Virtual Manipulatives or Virtual Resources. And there are a number of resources there that you could use. And then here's the impact. Students attempted more problems on the test and got more questions correct. So they didn't give up. So just using those virtual manipulatives just increase their sense of agency, just increase their efficacy, and enable them to get more questions correct on the test. So at this time, we would like to put you in breakout rooms and have a discussion. And so in your breakout rooms, we're going to give you about 8 minutes. And we would like for you to discuss these 2 questions. And once you get to your breakout room, please identify one person who will be a recorder. And recorder, your job is to list at least 1 to 2 takeaways of the group discussion. The group discussion will focus on these 2 points. How do you think lesson targets facilitate scaffolding? And then what types of scaffolding are most needed by your students? So once you're in your breakout rooms, elect or designate a recorder for each breakout room. And the only job of that breakout room is once you come back to the full group, just jot 1 or 2 takeaways from your group into the chat. And we're talking about your lesson targets, how that will facilitate scaffolding, and what scaffolding is needed. Are there any questions? Going to stop sharing. Any questions? All righty. So Meg, if you'll go ahead and assign us to breakout rooms, that would be awesome.
How many people do we have signed on?
About 30.
So we want to do 6 rooms.
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay.
That is perfect.
Here we go. Accept your invitation.
Glad to see everybody coming back. Welcome, welcome. So in the chat, if you would please just send us, type in some of your takeaways. I know in our group, we had some really wonderful discussions about scaffolding, kind of what that is, and then the different strategies. If anybody would like to speak, that would be awesome. And I am gonna pick on Ms. Tolliver to share. She had some great insights about scaffolding, but everybody, at least if we could get one person per group to type some takeaways in the chat. But if there are some others after Ms. Tolliver speaks, if there are others who would like to share the conversation or ask any kind of questions, please do so. We'll begin with Ms. Tolliver.
Thank you so much for volunteering me, Ms. Anderson. I appreciate it. We began our discussion talking about those learning tasks and the importance of with the learning targets, being able to break them down and know what our students are being asked to do, being able to identify the verbs necessary to effectively meet the standards that's being asked. And we move to what scaffolding looks like. And being able to gradually pull back the layer of assistance that our students need and differentiate that instruction in a manner where we're differentiating content, process, especially with our students being virtual and some of those face-to-face, being able to meet the needs of those students regardless of what environment they are in currently.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
I see from the chat that learning targets make standards more understandable for students. And when students are multiple years below grade levels, the latter seems to be the most helpful type of a scaffold. That makes sense. Would anyone else like to unmute themselves and share? If there's anything that's burning. Here's something else from the chat. Formative assessments are Legos that provide strength, foundation, and levels to meet student goals. Wow, that's really profound. Formative assessments are Legos that provide strength, foundation, and levels to meet student goals. That's outstanding. And from room 2, learning targets. So we've got the vocabulary. The vocabulary is really, really important. And in terms of the scaffolding, the bridge and the harness seem to be really important, especially as we relate to synchronous and asynchronous learning. That's awesome. Another takeaway from group 2, lesson targets and scaffolding allow teachers to release the lesson in a meaningful way and gradually build the complexity of the lesson. That is just so true. That's just spot on. I'm thinking about the picture of the little girl learning how to ride the bike and how you had to gradually release. We needed to steady the student, steady the little girl first, but then you gradually release those stabilizers. Here's another comment from the chat. Types of scaffolding depends on each student's individual needs. Oh my goodness, thank you. As there are all levels of diversity in our schools, we need to use all 3 types based on what each student needs. Amen, amen, amen. We absolutely need to look to our students' needs first. Linda, did you have a comment?
Question? And our group was wanting to know more or less what harness actually was. That was a term that some of us had not heard used frequently. So what are forms of the harness? The
harness really referred to, it's just a clever way of saying harness the strengths of your students' learning styles. So when you think of harness, just think of the students' learning styles. You're trying to make use of something that is already helping a student be a successful learner. You want to harness that positivity and use it to your advantage. So for example, if you know a child needs hands-on, then provide those virtual manipulatives. Or if you know a student is a visual learner, They may need to see you writing on a Jamboard, or they may need to see a video. It's a way of taking the strengths that students already have and making them and using them to that student's advantage. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Awesome.
One of the other things that came up, Karen, was synchronous and asynchronous. I think I gave an answer, but I may not have given it clearly. So just talk about that a little bit.
Synchronous learning, if you're the teacher, Taurus, and you're going to pull your entire 7th grade English class together at 10 o'clock. That's synchronous. We're all synchronized. We're all logging in. We're all there learning together at the same time. And so it could be that after instruction, you assign them a particular reading assignment, and they have to reflect, and then just kind of like what we saw before, film their reaction on a flip grid. Well, they're not going to do that while they're sitting there with you. They'll do that at another time. So that would be the asynchronous learning. So while they're meeting with you at 10 o'clock, it might be 2:30 by the time they read the assignment, understand what's going on, and then do that video. So that's asynchronous. And then when they're in the middle of it, you might have office hours at 3 o'clock, and I'm reading, and I'm going to email you and say, Miss Smith, can you help me? I'm not sure about this vocabulary. So the asynchronous is not in real time, and synchronous is real time.
And asynchronous is not everybody together.
Thank you.
It is everybody. Just think of synchronized swimming. Everything's matching, doing everything at the same time. And when if you're synchronous, you're doing that. If you're asynchronous, the teacher, somebody might work and not get the introduction to the lesson till 11 o'clock, as long as the work's done by another time. And I think sometimes we've gotten caught up in this 8 to 3 day when we virtual and in hybrid, and that's not the way it is to be done. I'm not saying it's not being done and there are not things that you're being held to, but the concept is kind of the whole flipped classroom. I mean, the teacher's putting it out there, you're seeing it when you can, your lesson is due by a certain time. Dr. Anderson was talking about something her daughter had to do, and it didn't all have to be done at the same time. It had to be done by a certain time. Those are huge things that deal with the synchronous and the asynchronous.
I'm elementary, so, to me, it was like when I have my whole group lesson and I'm giving everybody the lesson at one time, and then I'm small group, so I'm bringing you back and I'm meeting those individual needs. Everybody's not getting the same thing at the same time.
Same time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's that elementary person in me.
I think there's some other comments in the chat, Dr.
Good
Anderson.
teaching is good teaching. Well, you want to go through those, Meg?
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So room 1, combining scaffolding types helps to differentiate instruction because students are of different levels. That is so true. Which scaffold, all are important. It depends on the student, where they are and where they are going. That's so true. I think we've talked about that, to be sure that you're looking at what the student needs first and then stepping back and choosing the scaffold that that particular student needs at that time. High school principals in group 3 use project-based learning as a bridge for students. I would like to hear more about that. Is there someone in group 3 that would like to expand a little bit on that? I don't want to suppose what you mean by that. Would somebody in group 3 please unmute and just elaborate a bit?
Well, I was kind of chosen as the spokesman, but I really think the principals would do a better job of explaining what they do. So Ms. McNeely or Dr. Williams, maybe one of them could talk about those projects.
I was telling her I could probably think of a lot of projects, but I was telling her the reason that you all lost me for a few minutes is that we had Bryant Bank to surprise us. The carpentry teacher had completed a grant, and they were bringing him a certificate to let them know that they were giving him $3,800. Well, he put in for that to build a tiny house, and it's going to be a home that's going to be donated to someone in the community that someone is going to actually live in. So that's why you lost me, because I was doing that presentation while I was in the Zoom. But it's things like that. I was telling her that about 75 or more % of our students come to us, you know, multiple grade levels behind. So connecting the construction, the carpentry, the geometry. I mean, I just wish you could see some of the things that the bridges that they built in carpentry, the contest to see who's is going to hold the most weight using actual weights. So you had to actually plan out whether supports needed to be, how much support you needed to have in certain areas. So that was just kind of how that came up.
And Miss
That's
McNeely, if they
awesome.
don't already know, you can follow him on Facebook.
Uh-huh.
And it's amazing. I all the time am looking at what he's got
So
those
thank
kids
you.
doing. Yeah, he's amazing. Blake Harris, right?
Yes, Blake Harris. Thank you. Thank you for that.
That is awesome. Congratulations. And what a perfect example of a bridge scaffold. Just a way to apply the standards in a creative and innovative way. That's excellent. And just congratulations. That is just fabulous news.
And you know what else, Dr. Anderson? It's also a harness because some of his students are not English, native English speakers. So sometimes he's harnessing what they do well. And obviously that's not always that communication part or like English language arts or some kind of verbose production, but he's got them doing stuff all the time. And he will talk about, they've only been in the country this amount of time, but it's really a good follow.
That is excellent. Just a couple more things from the chat and we're going to move on. In terms of the harness, that seems to be a strategy that really best matches students' needs, whether it's active, visual, or auditory. That's really a great definition of what it means to harness. And then as educators, we must know where our students are in order to help them. Using real world experiences, videos, and brainstorming are only a few ideas that we discussed. We also discussed using quadrant cards as a great way to break down vocabulary. Each quadrant will have something different in it, definition or picture, sentence. Miss Ellis, I know you put this in the chat, but could you give us a specific example as we're moving on and transitioning? But just want to just give us a concrete example of how you've used those quadrant cards. I think that's a great scaffold.
Okay, so what I did when I was in the classroom, I taught science, and with the quadrant cards, let's say, for example, we were doing a cell, and we were talking about cytoplasm, and a lot of people look at cytoplasm as they'll just say the jelly-like substance. Or if we did mitochondria, and it was the powerhouse of the cell, they would draw, like for one of the boxes, they might draw like the electric company. Then they might draw or a person eating, which will be powering their body. And then a lot of times I would give them like a worksheet, and they had on the worksheet, who does this job at the school? So if it was the person that was the powerhouse, they might put the principal for that. So a key term, so they would know when I said, so what's the powerhouse? They would think mitochondria. That's the powerhouse of the cell. That's the principal. So when I did my internship at a school, the lady that worked in the front office, the kids knew they could not check out if she didn't have the note, hadn't talked to the parent. I don't care if you brought the note and she didn't talk to the parent, you were not leaving. So when it came down to the gatekeeper in the cell, they always called, I'm not gonna say her name, but they always called her name, and they knew exactly what the definition was based off of her job. So just different ways, for kids to understand it. They're not going to remember a long, drawn out paragraph definition, which is how a lot of science terms are. But when you break it down with that quadrant card, they help them a lot. And a lot of testing is background knowledge from vocabulary and terminology.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Miss Ellis. Boy, this has just been an excellent, excellent discussion. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to share my screen and just wrap things up here. So we do have a follow-up form if you wanted to have a conversation in your PLCs and just kind of pull all this together. There is a handout that is in the scaffolding folder that's in our Google Drive. So you can actually go through these steps and just kind of practice what we've said before, to choose your critical standard, go to the Alabama Insight tool, identify and define your vocabulary, select a phrase, write it as an I can statement that is in student-friendly language, select an appropriate scaffold that you think is necessary at that particular time, and then implement your lesson plan. This just might be a good activity to follow up and to just to bring all members of your PLC together so we're all on the same page. And just a couple of reminders for those of you who are part of the SIG team, the SIG family. We've only received information from Green Acres Middle School. Shout out to Green Acres for uploading forms from session 2. Everyone else, I know that every single school is busy. I know that everybody's busy. Everybody's got a ton going on. But if you would, please go back and upload those forms from session 2. If you need me to resend those, if you need to find those again, just reach out to me and I will be sure to get those to you. And also, as you know, we've been leaning in and observing virtual PLC meetings. I sent an email out earlier just talking about the different kinds of meetings that go on in your school. And there's so much wonderful information, so much professional learning that's going on. The PLC meetings that we want to observe are those that directly impact student outcomes. And those meetings occur on a weekly basis. So we've seen grade level meetings. We have seen department meetings with certain content being shared. It doesn't matter to us, but rather than a faculty meeting or a leadership team meeting, we need links to observe PLC meetings where student outcomes are being discussed. So if you will be sure to email those links to me, and I'll be sure our University of Alabama team gets that information. We really, really would love to observe those meetings and provide you with some feedback. And we would like to do that. And so we don't want anyone to be put off or made any way nervous by our presence. We're just there to observe and really to be a critical friend, to observe the way that the information that we presented is being implemented in your schools. If you have any questions, please just be sure to let us know.
I put the link into this presentation into the chat.
Thank you, thank you. If you've
Into
got
the
any
folder.
questions, please let us know. It has been our pleasure to spend a little more than an hour with you on a Friday afternoon, just talking about scaffolding and creating those lesson targets. This is your SIG team family here. If you have got any questions at all, I'm going to stop sharing at this time. Please be sure to let us know. Please know that we know that these are crazy and uncertain times. We are just so grateful for the opportunity to work for you, work with you, and support you on your school improvement journey. No one signed up to be a principal, a curriculum coach, a transformation specialist, a teacher, work in the district. Nobody signed up to do this work during a pandemic. So it's important that we continue to lean and depend on each other. Just know that we are here for you. And again, if you've got any questions, we'll stay on the line a little while. We're letting you go a little bit early. We thought we would go till 2:30, and here we are wrapping up 10 minutes early. So that'll give you time to get a snack and move on. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing. Congratulations again to Holt High School. Y'all doing some great work. Just proud of everybody. Thanks for all you do.